What if the most ordinary family trip turned into a night that would shake the skies? What if two little girls, excited for their journey, were suddenly told they didn't belong simply because of who they were? This is not just a story about a flight. It is a story about dignity, about the line between silence and courage, a story of a mother holding her daughters close while the world watched. And above all, it is a story of what happens when injustice dares to touch the children of a man who has the power to change everything. On a plane high above the clouds, respect was stripped away, but strength rose quietly in its place. Passengers watched, whispers grew, and as the descent began, so did the storm. But here is the question. When the cabin door finally opened and their father appeared, what did justice look like? Did it roar with anger or speak with calm authority strong enough to silence a crowd? Stay with me, because what unfolded next is something you will never forget. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the truths that matter most. The cabin lights glowed with a soft golden hue, the kind that made everything look calmer than it really was. The hum of the engines vibrated faintly through the floor as passengers settled into wide leather seats, each one carefully angled for privacy and comfort. Flight attendants in polished uniforms moved down the aisle, checking overhead bins, offering sparkling water, their voices low and efficient. It was first class, a world that seemed insulated from the noise of airports, the stress of security checks, and the cramped rows of economy. For Naomi Carter, 10 years old and full of restless energy, it felt like stepping into another universe. Her small sneakers barely touched the plush carpet as she leaned over to peer out the oval window. Leila, look, you can see the whole runway. It looks like toys, she whispered, her voice buzzing with excitement. Beside her, Leila Carter, identical in face but different in temperament, pressed her lips together nervously. She was the quieter twin, the one who preferred sketching in her notebook to racing around playgrounds. Even now, her hands clutched the strap of her backpack tightly. She peeked outside, then quickly drew back, burying her chin against her jacket. "It's kind of high already," she murmured, though the plane hadn't even left the ground. Angela Davis, the woman tasked with accompanying them, smiled gently. She had been with the Carter family long enough to know both girls' personalities by heart. Naomi's boldness, Leila's caution. It was a rhythm she had learned to balance. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind Leila's ear and leaned close. "It's just the ground lights. Sweetheart, once we're up there, it'll be like floating, like the stars are carrying us." Naomi grinned. "I want to float like an astronaut." Angela chuckled softly. "And you will, just not without a seatbelt." She fastened Naomi's buckle, then adjusted Leila's, making sure both girls were secure before sinking back into her own seat. Around them, other passengers whispered into phones or typed furiously on laptops. Businessmen in crisp suits, a middle-aged woman draped in pearls scrolling through her tablet, a young couple sipping champagne as if the flight itself were a date. First class was supposed to be serene, but Angela could feel the curious glances drifting their way. Not hostile yet, but questioning. A ripple of attention that made her shoulders tense. She pretended not to notice. She had grown used to those looks over the years. Two little black girls in first class always seemed to surprise people. Even in 2025, it was the unspoken question floating in their eyes, do they really belong here? Angela tried to shake off the thought. The girls were excited. That was all that mattered. She reached for the in-flight magazine to distract them. Naomi flipped straight to the pictures of tropical resorts, eyes wide. "Can we go there someday?" she asked. "Maybe," Angela said, though she knew the girl's father, Daniel Carter, rarely vacationed. His world was boardrooms and negotiations, the kind of life that kept him on the move constantly. He had promised to meet them at their destination this time, though that promise carried weight. Leila fidgeted, her small fingers tracing the seams of her seat. "Do you think Daddy will be proud of us for flying without him?" she asked softly. Angela's heart tugged. "Of course he will. You're brave girls. And he'll be waiting the second we land." Naomi leaned over and whispered loudly, "I bet he'll bring us something cool, like a surprise." Leila's lips curled into a hesitant smile, but the nervousness in her eyes didn't vanish. She had always been the sensitive one, feeling the tension in rooms before anyone else. And there was tension here. Angela could sense it too, like static building before a storm. The boarding process ended. The crew moved gracefully, shutting the cabin door, giving safety demonstrations. Naomi watched with fascination, giggling when the life vest inflated in the attendant's practiced hands. Leila glanced at Angela, then at the aisle, then quickly down at her lap. It was then that the first shadow passed over them. A woman in her early 40s, tall and poised, walked through the aisle with the authority of someone who believed every inch of the cabin belonged to her. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her dark hair wound tightly at the back of her head. Her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights. Victoria Hayes, purser. She didn't smile, not the way the others did when addressing passengers. Instead, her eyes flickered over Naomi, then Leila, then Angela, lingering with something colder than curiosity. Her gaze carried weight calculation, judgment, maybe even disapproval. Angela straightened unconsciously, meeting her stare. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly, polite but firm. Victoria's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. "I'll be checking tickets in a moment," she replied. Her tone clipped. Her eyes darted once more toward the twins before she moved on, heels clicking softly against the carpet. Angela exhaled slowly, forcing herself to relax. She glanced at Naomi, who was still flipping through pictures as though the world were nothing but colors and fun. But Leila had noticed. She had shrunk a little further into her seat, her eyes following the flight attendant with unease. Angela placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's fine," she whispered, though inside, she wasn't sure. Something about the way Victoria had looked at them stirred an old fear, one Angela thought she had grown numb to. The engines roared to life, the cabin vibrating as the plane prepared for takeoff. Naomi squealed in delight, holding Leila's hand tightly. "We're flying, Lee! We're really flying!" Leila squeezed back, whispering so quietly Angela almost didn't hear, "I hope no one makes us leave." The words cut sharper than turbulence ever could. Angela opened her mouth to respond, but the seatbelt sign blinked above them, and the force of the takeoff pressed them into silence. Outside, the runway lights blurred into streaks. Inside, a story that none of them could yet see was beginning to unfold. The aircraft had leveled off, its engines now humming in that steady rhythm that always lulled first-class passengers into a sense of peace. Glasses clinked softly as drinks were poured. A faint rustle of magazines echoed through the cabin, and seatbelts clicked open one after another. For most people in that cabin, the journey was beginning in the usual way, predictable, comfortable, forgettable. But for Naomi and Leila Carter, the sense of wonder was still alive. Naomi pressed her nose against the cool window pane, watching as the lights of the city below shrank into a quilt of golden sparks. Her eyes glowed with excitement, the kind only children could summon when faced with the unknown. Leila, on the other hand, curled closer to Angela, her knees tucked up, her voice no louder than a breath. "Why did that lady look at us like that?" she asked. Angela hesitated, stroking the girl's braids absent-mindedly. She wanted to say, "It's nothing, sweetheart," but the truth pressed against her throat. Children could sense dishonesty more keenly than adults believed. Angela had seen that look 100 times before, sometimes subtle, sometimes open. It was the look that asked without words. "Do you belong here?" Naomi twisted around, catching her sister's words. Who cares how she looked? We've got seats. We've got tickets. Daddy bought them. That's all that matters. Her chin lifted with defiance, though deep down, even Naomi had felt the sting of that glance. Angela smiled faintly, proud of Naomi's boldness, but worried at the same time. Defiance at 10 years old was admirable, but it came from knowing the world wasn't always kind. And it hurt that Naomi was already learning that lesson. Before she could answer, the sound of footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, heels clicking against the carpet with authority. Angela looked up, already knowing who it was. Victoria Hayes appeared at their row, her uniform immaculate, her posture military straight. She carried a sleek tablet in her hand, the cabin manifest glowing faintly on the screen. The purser's eye swept over the three of them again, pausing longer than necessary on the twins. "Good evening," Victoria began, her tone laced with courtesy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll need to verify your boarding passes." Angela blinked. "You already checked our passes when we boarded?" "Yes," Victoria replied smoothly, "but I'd like to confirm again, for security reasons." Her words sounded official, but the undercurrent of suspicion was clear. Passengers in the nearby rows began to stir, some glancing up from their drinks, others pretending not to listen, though their ears strained for every word. Angela kept her voice calm. "Of course." She reached into her handbag, pulling out the envelope with the neatly folded boarding passes. She handed them over with steady fingers, though inside she could feel her pulse quicken. Victoria took the slips of paper, glancing at them briefly before focusing again on the girls. "And these children are traveling with you?" "Yes," Angela said. "They are Mr. Daniel Carter's daughters. I'm their guardian on this leg of the trip." Victoria's brows arched ever so slightly. "Mr. Carter, their father," Angela clarified. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. She handed the tickets back slowly, as though reluctant. "And you're certain you're in the correct cabin? These are first-class seats." Angela inhaled sharply, then exhaled just as slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm certain." Naomi's eyes widened with indignation. "Why are you asking again? We already showed you. We belong here." Her small voice, high with frustration, carried more than she realized. Heads turned. A few murmurs rippled down the aisle. Victoria's expression didn't shift. If anything, her composure tightened, like a mask being pulled more firmly into place. "Young lady," she said coolly, "I'm speaking with the adult." Naomi's cheeks flushed, her fists curling at her sides. Leila slid lower in her seat, her eyes glassy with the beginnings of tears. Angela felt her heart twist. She leaned forward, her tone firmer now. "There is no mistake. The Carter family purchased these seats. The children are exactly where they are supposed to be." The air in the cabin grew heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken judgments. Passengers exchanged glances. Some seemed sympathetic, others skeptical. A man 2 rows back adjusted his tie and looked away, unwilling to engage. Victoria lingered for another beat, her gaze darting between the twins and Angela, as though calculating her next move. Finally, she gave a clipped nod. "Very well, I'll return shortly." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking a rhythm that sounded more like a warning than a retreat. Angela let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to Naomi and Leila, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's all right, girls. She just has to do her job." But Naomi's jaw tightened. That's not her job. She doesn't ask the other people twice. Angela didn't argue because Naomi was right. She simply smoothed the girl's sleeve and whispered, "Sometimes people don't understand what they're doing. But you did great, standing up for yourself." Leila, however, wasn't soothed. "She doesn't like us," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why doesn't she like us?" Angela swallowed hard. Her throat ached with all the words she couldn't say. She wanted to tell them the truth, that sometimes the world didn't like people who looked like them, that sometimes prejudice wore the mask of professionalism, but she couldn't place that burden on their young shoulders. Not yet. So instead, she hugged Leila close. "You don't have to worry about her. You just sit here, enjoy the flight, and I'll take care of the rest." "All right," Leila nodded, but her small fingers clung tightly to Angela's sleeve. Naomi sat back, crossing her arms with a stubborn glare. "If she comes back, I'm going to tell her she's wrong again." Angela smiled faintly, though her stomach twisted with unease. Brave as Naomi was, the battle wasn't fair. It never was. Not when the authority lay in the hands of someone like Victoria Hayes. In the quiet that followed, Angela glanced around the cabin. She noticed a man in the corner seat, older, his hair silver, his glasses perched low on his nose. He had been watching subtly, but attentively. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Angela thought she saw something there. Not judgment, not disdain, something closer to concern. Then he lowered his gaze back to his newspaper, leaving Angela with a flicker of hope she didn't dare lean on yet. Naomi went back to staring out the window, her jaw still tight. Leila rested against Angela's arm, silent but trembling, and Angela herself sat perfectly still, as though movement might invite another confrontation. For now, the hum of the engines filled the silence, but beneath it, Angela could feel the tension pulsing, alive, waiting. This was no longer just a flight to another city. It was becoming something heavier, something more dangerous than turbulence. The cabin had settled into its rhythm. Drinks had been served, trays collected, and the gentle lull of flight had taken hold. Most passengers reclined with headphones or glossy magazines, eyes heavy with the promise of quiet hours ahead. But for Angela Davis, her shoulders had not relaxed once. Her body carried tension like a coiled spring, and her eyes darted to the aisle with every set of footsteps. Naomi Carter sat upright in her seat, flipping through the in-flight menu as if it were a treasure map. She jabbed a finger at the glossy photos. "Look, Lee, they have chocolate mousse, and tiramisu, and ice cream." Leila leaned closer, managing a small smile. "I just want water." Her voice was thin, as if she were speaking through layers of worry. Angela smoothed the girl's hair, forcing herself to sound cheerful. "We'll get whatever you want. This is supposed to be fun. Remember." But even as she spoke, she knew the fragile sense of calm wouldn't last, because the sound returned heels on carpet, deliberate, echoing with authority. Victoria Hayes was back. Angela straightened before the woman even appeared, her instincts bracing for another confrontation. Victoria stopped in the aisle directly beside their row, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp. "I'm going to need you three to step aside," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried enough to draw attention. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Angela blinked, stunned. "Step aside." For what reason, Victoria's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I need to confirm the seating assignment. There seems to be a discrepancy." "There is no discrepancy," Angela replied evenly. "We showed you our boarding passes twice. Everything is in order." "I'll decide what's in order," Victoria said crisply. She extended a hand. Palm up. Tickets. Again. Naomi slammed the menu shut, her small voice cutting through the cabin. "Why are you picking on us?" The words were high and unfiltered, a child's truth, delivered without hesitation. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some stared openly now. Victoria's face hardened. "Young lady, lower your voice." But Naomi didn't lower it. "You didn't ask anyone else to move, just us." Why Angela's heart ached with pride and fear. Pride, because Naomi was right. Fear, because children rarely realized how dangerous it was to challenge authority in public. Victoria's expression shifted, sharp edges hardening. She looked down at Angela, bypassing the twins entirely. "Ma'am, if you do not cooperate, I will have no choice but to escalate this matter." Leila's small hands trembled where they clutched the armrest. Her eyes filled with tears. "We didn't do anything," she whispered. Angela leaned toward her, whispering back, "It's all right, baby. Don't cry." But her own pulse pounded in her ears. With deliberate calm, Angela retrieved the tickets once more and handed them over. Victoria snatched them, her eyes scanning as though searching for invisible ink. Then, without looking up, she said, "Please remove your belongings. You'll need to wait in the galley until this is sorted." Gasps rippled through nearby passengers. Naomi's face turned crimson with outrage. "We're not moving. These are our seats." Her small fists pounded against her thighs, her voice carrying farther than before. Leila buried her face in Angela's side, muffling sobs. Angela's heart twisted painfully. She wanted to shield them, to stand between them and the venom of that cold, clipped voice. She forced her tone into steel. "We are not moving. The Carter family paid for these seats, and the children are exactly where they belong." Victoria finally looked up, eyes narrowing. "Do not raise your tone with me. You are creating a disturbance." It was a cruel inversion. Angela realized bullying children into tears, then blaming the caretaker for making a scene. The surrounding cabin had grown entirely silent. Every ear was tuned to this confrontation. A man near the front cleared his throat but said nothing. The young couple from earlier avoided eye contact, sipping champagne faster now, the bystander effect. The quiet paralysis of those who saw injustice but didn't want involvement hung in the air like smoke. Naomi's voice broke through again, shaky now, but still defiant. "Daddy said we belong here. He said we're allowed." The words landed like a plea, fragile but determined. Angela tightened her arms around Leila, then met Victoria's eyes head-on. "This is harassment. I need you to stop." But Victoria didn't flinch. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but sharpening its edge. "This cabin has standards. Some people simply don't fit them." The words were quiet, but they struck like thunder. Angela felt her stomach lurch, a wave of rage rushing through her. She bit it back, but the effort burned. Naomi, however, had heard enough. Her eyes widened with betrayal, her voice breaking into a shout. "That's not fair. We didn't do anything wrong." Leila sobbed harder, the sound so raw it pierced the hush of the cabin. Angela's hands trembled. She rose halfway from her seat, her voice firm but quivering with restrained anger. "You are humiliating two children in front of an entire cabin. If you continue, I will document this and escalate it myself." For a fraction of a second, Victoria's mask faltered. A flicker of doubt passed across her face, but she straightened again quickly, slipping back into authority. "Remain seated," she ordered, handing back the tickets as though they were contaminated. "We will be revisiting this issue when the captain is informed." She pivoted sharply, her heels biting into the carpet as she strode down the aisle, leaving behind a silence so thick it seemed to press against every chest. Angela sank back into her seat, arms wrapped around Leila, eyes darting to Naomi, who now sat, rigid, jaw clenched, tears pooling but refusing to fall. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the engines was the only sound. And then quietly, cautiously, a voice drifted from the corner seat. "She's out of line," said the older man with silver hair and glasses. Edward Monroe's voice was gravelly but steady, the kind that carried quiet authority. His eyes met Angela's, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt the faint spark of solidarity. It was just one voice, but in that silence, it meant everything. Angela gave a small nod, her throat tight. The storm had not passed, it was only gathering strength. But at least now, she knew she wasn't entirely alone. The air inside the cabin felt different now, not the recycled chill of conditioned air, but something heavier, dense with unspoken words. After Victoria Hayes marched away, the silence she left behind clung to every surface, pressing against every ear. The faint clatter of ice in a glass, the rustle of a newspaper, even the hum of the engines all seemed too loud, too intrusive in the wake of what had just unfolded. Angela Davis sat rigid, one arm wrapped tightly around Leila, who still trembled against her. The girl's tears had slowed, but every hiccup that escaped her small chest was like a blade to Angela's heart. Naomi, on the other hand, sat stiff and upright, fists balled in her lap, lips pressed into a thin, stubborn line. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She would not give Victoria that satisfaction. Angela smoothed her hand over Naomi's knee gently. "You were brave," she whispered, low enough for only the girls to hear. Naomi's eyes flicked to her, anger and confusion swirling together. "Why does she hate us? We didn't do anything." The question punched through Angela's chest. She wanted to say it wasn't hate, that it was a misunderstanding, that things would settle down. But lies dissolved too easily under Naomi's sharp gaze. And how could she explain centuries of prejudice, of invisible rules, of assumptions that marked them as outsiders the moment they stepped into a space like this? Leila sniffled, her small voice barely audible. "She wants to send us away, like we don't belong." Angela kissed the crown of her head. "You do belong. Don't you ever believe otherwise." Her voice trembled slightly, but she held it steady enough to sound convincing. Around them, the silence remained suffocating. Passengers had witnessed everything, yet no one spoke. A woman in pearls typed furiously on her tablet, her eyes darting up once before focusing even harder on the screen. The young couple who had been sipping champagne now whispered to each other, avoiding any accidental glance. The businessman 2 rows back shifted uncomfortably in his seat, cleared his throat once, but didn't lift his gaze. It was Edward Monroe, the older man with silver hair, who finally broke the weight of that silence. "Shameful," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Angela to hear. Angela met his eyes. There was a steadiness there, a quiet fire she recognized. It was the look of someone who had seen injustice too many times and refused to pretend it wasn't happening. But no one else spoke. The rest of the cabin clung to their silence like a shield, the bystanders' refuge. Naomi noticed it, too. She leaned closer to Angela, whispering fiercely, "Why don't they say anything? They saw it. They know it's not fair." Angela hesitated. "Sometimes people are afraid to speak up, but they're grown-ups." Naomi shot back, her whisper sharp with hurt. "They're supposed to help." Her words sliced through Angela's chest. Because Naomi was right. The silence of the cabin was almost as painful as Victoria's open disdain. Angela's mind spun with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted to stand up, to demand allies, to force the silence to break. But another part of her knew that anger could be twisted, used against them. She had to protect the girls, even if it meant swallowing her own fury. Leila pulled at Angela's sleeve timidly. What if she comes back? What if she really makes us leave? Angela's stomach tightened. She couldn't answer with certainty. Then I'll be right here, she said instead, and I won't let anything happen to you. The promise was true, but incomplete, because deep inside, she knew there were battles even she couldn't shield them from. Naomi finally let her fists unclench. She reached over and took her sister's hand, squeezing it tightly. Leila clung back, as if anchoring herself. Their twin bond was stronger than any turbulence, stronger than any cruel words. Watching them, Angela's eyes filled with quiet tears, she quickly blinked away. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe shifted in his seat. He folded his newspaper deliberately, his movements slow and precise. Then he leaned slightly toward Angela and spoke in a voice low enough to maintain discretion, but strong enough to carry weight. For what it's worth, ma'am, you handled that with dignity, more dignity than she deserved. Angela's lips curved into the faintest smile, though it trembled at the edges. Thank you. Edward's eyes softened. My granddaughter is about their age. If anyone treated her like that— He shook his head, jaw tight. Don't let her shake you. You're not alone in this, even if it feels that way. Angela's chest swelled with gratitude, though she only nodded. A stranger's solidarity wasn't a shield against Victoria's authority, but it was a reminder that humanity still lived in some corners of the cabin. The girls were quiet for a time after that, exhaustion weighing down on them. Leila's head rested against Angela's arm, her breathing slow and uneven. Naomi still faced the window, her reflection faint in the glass, her thoughts hidden but heavy. Angela sat still, but inside her mind churned. She thought of Daniel Carter, of his endless schedule, of the countless times he had been absent, but always insisted it was for the family's future. If he were here, Victoria Hayes wouldn't have dared. If he were here, the cabin would have looked at the twins differently. Respect cloaked power, even when love alone should have been enough. She wondered if she should send him a message, tell him what had happened. But what would that solve at 30,000 feet? She was the shield here, not him. It was her duty to carry the weight tonight. Her chest ached with the familiar conflict, the exhaustion of protecting children from a world that hadn't learned to protect them first. Naomi's voice startled her from her thoughts. It was soft this time, not defiant, but uncertain. What if she doesn't stop? What if she hates us so much she makes everyone believe we don't belong? Angela stroked her cheek gently. People like that don't get to decide who you are, or where you belong. You hear me? They don't have that power. Naomi blinked, the glisten in her eyes finally breaking into a tear that rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily, as if refusing to let anyone see her pain. Angela pulled both girls close, her arms circling them, her voice barely above a whisper. You are worthy. You are loved, and no one can take that from you. The silence stretched on. Outside the windows, clouds drifted in moonlight, silent witnesses to the turmoil inside. Eventually, the cabin began to stir again. Conversations resumed, though quieter now, as if guilt tinged every word. A flight attendant, not named Victoria, passed by with a tray of drinks, her eyes carefully avoiding Angela's row. The bystanders' silence had returned, comfortable again in its avoidance. Angela held the girls tighter, her eyes fixed forward. She knew the storm wasn't over. Victoria would return, Authority rarely surrendered after being challenged, but in that silence, Angela also felt something grow inside her resolve. Whatever came next, she would meet it head on, because the girls deserved nothing less. And though the rest of the cabin stayed silent, she would not. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, casting the space in an amber twilight meant to soothe passengers into rest. Screens flickered here and there, muted movies playing without sound. For most, it was the perfect lull. But for Angela Davis, Naomi, and Leila, the air was still charged, heavy, waiting. Angela sat with her back pressed against the seat, her arms cradling Leila, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The little girl's breath was shallow, catching now and then, as though even in dreams she could not fully escape the sting of humiliation. Naomi, though, was wide awake. Her eyes burned with a restless fire, her chin tucked defiantly toward her chest, as though she were building invisible armor around herself. Angela smoothed a hand over Naomi's shoulder. "Try to rest, sweetheart." Naomi shook her head. "I don't want to." "You'll need your strength," Angela murmured. "It's a long flight." Naomi's lips pressed into a tight line. She hesitated, then whispered fiercely, "If Daddy were here, she wouldn't have treated us like that." Angela's heart clenched. The name hung in the air like an invocation. Daniel Carter. To the world. He was a towering figure, a CEO whose decisions moved markets, a man whose name opened doors and demanded respect. To his daughters, he was Daddy, the protector whose presence erased fear. And yet, he wasn't here. His shadow was, but not his hands, not his arms to hold them when they trembled. "You're right," Angela admitted softly. "If your father were here, it might have been different." Naomi turned, her eyes sharp with hurt. "Then why isn't he? Why is it always you with us, not him?" The words pierced deeper than Naomi could know. Angela swallowed, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Because he trusts me to take care of you. Because he works hard to give you everything you have." Naomi frowned, unsatisfied. "But money doesn't make people stop looking at us like we don't belong. He should be here. He should see it." Angela's chest ached. She brushed Naomi's cheek gently. "He will see. And when he does, he'll know exactly what happened." The girl's gaze softened slightly, but the storm in her eyes didn't fade. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe observed quietly, his glasses perched low on his nose. He wasn't listening to intrude, but the fragments of Naomi's words reached him nonetheless. He set his magazine aside, his thoughts stirring. He had spent decades on the bench as a judge, weighing evidence, hearing testimonies, delivering verdicts, and yet this silent trial unfolding in the cabin gnawed at him more than any case file ever had. He thought of his own granddaughter, the same age as Naomi and Leila. He imagined her small voice asking why adults did nothing, why the world looked away. The thought unsettled him deeply. He adjusted his glasses, determined that if the purser returned, he would not remain silent again. Angela leaned her head back, eyes closed for just a moment. Exhaustion pressed against her bones. She thought of Daniel the last phone call, his voice brisk and hurried, promising he'd meet them at the destination. Promising, as always, that everything was under control. She remembered when she first began working for the Carters. Daniel was a man impossible to ignore. His presence-filled rooms, his voice commanded attention. But with his daughters, he was different, softer, almost boyish in his affection. He adored them, though his time with them was fractured by endless demands. And now, on this plane, his absence was both a wound and a shield. People respected Daniel Carter. Even his name carried weight. Angela knew that when they landed. If Daniel discovered what had unfolded in first class, there would be consequences. The airline would scramble. Apologies would flood in. But here, in the sealed metal tube of this flight, respect had been stripped away. All that remained was suspicion, prejudice, and the fragile shield of her own resolve. Naomi spoke again, softer this time. "Do you think Daddy would be mad?" At her, Angela opened her eyes, considering. "I think your father would be very disappointed, and he wouldn't stay quiet about it." Naomi's chin lifted. "Then I won't stay quiet either." Angela smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Naomi's forehead. "You're stronger than you know." But inside, she wrestled with unease. Strength was admirable, yet strength in a child so young was born of necessity, not choice. Naomi was learning too early how the world could wound her, and that knowledge cut deeper than any insult Victoria could deliver. A faint chime echoed through the cabin as the seatbelt sign illuminated. The captain's voice crackled overhead, calm and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're anticipating a patch of turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts." Angela complied immediately, buckling both twins securely, her movements efficient. Naomi sat still, defiance in her posture, but obedience in her actions. The cabin crew moved briskly, securing carts and checking latches. Victoria Hayes reappeared, her stride brisk, her face composed, but her eyes glinting with something unspoken. She walked past Angela's row without stopping, but the message was clear. This isn't over. Angela exhaled slowly, steadying her breath. The plane dipped slightly, the first ripple of turbulence rolling beneath them. Leila stirred, whimpering in her sleep, but Angela soothed her quickly, murmuring gentle reassurances. Naomi held tightly to the armrest, jaw clenched but silent. Edward Monroe reached across the aisle slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Children shouldn't have to carry this weight," he said quietly. His words weren't directed at anyone specific, but Angela met his gaze again, gratitude flickering in her tired eyes. The turbulence rocked the plane again, harder this time. Gasps rippled through the cabin, followed by nervous laughter from those trying to mask their fear. For a moment, prejudice and injustice were replaced by a shared vulnerability, a reminder that everyone, no matter their seat or status, was equally at the mercy of the sky. Angela tightened her hold on Leila, her eyes drifting to Naomi's fierce little face. Daniel's shadow loomed large in this moment. His power, his reputation, his absence. They were all part of the story unfolding here. And Angela knew, deep down, that when the plane touched down and Daniel Carter walked into this picture, the storm Victoria Hayes had unleashed would collide with something far greater than she could control. But for now, in the quiet glow of the cabin and the uncertain bumps of the night sky, it was Angela's voice, her arms, her steady heart that stood between two small girls and a world determined to question their belonging. She whispered again, her words a promise as strong as steel. "You are safe. You are mine to protect, and you are loved more than anything." The girls closed their eyes, Naomi reluctantly, Leila trustingly, and Angela held them through the turbulence, through the silence, through the shadow of a father whose presence was both absent and imminent. The turbulence faded after several long minutes, leaving the cabin in a fragile calm. The lights flickered once, then steadied again. Passengers exhaled in relief, their conversations resuming with nervous chuckles and soft reassurances. Yet, for Angela Davis and the twins, the storm inside had not eased. If anything, the silence afterward felt like the quiet before another strike. Angela adjusted the blanket around Leila, who had fallen into a deeper, dreamless sleep, despite the rattling flight. Naomi, however, was restless. Her eyes followed every movement in the aisle, her jaw tight, her shoulders rigid. She looked like a soldier waiting for the next attack, far too young to be carrying such weight. Angela reached over and laid a hand on hers. "Breathe, sweetheart. It's all right for now." Naomi shook her head, voice low but fierce. "She's not finished. I can feel it." Angela wanted to argue, to soothe, but Naomi's instincts were sharp, too sharp, and she was right, because Victoria Hayes reappeared. Her stride was as purposeful as before, her uniform crisp, her posture tall and commanding. She carried a clipboard this time, as though formality itself could cloak cruelty. Conversations in the cabin faltered as she stopped once more at Angela's row. The quiet stretched thin. Victoria's tone was clipped, rehearsed, as though she had prepared her lines. "Mrs. Davis, I've spoken with the captain. Until your situation is clarified, we'll need you and the children to relocate to the rear cabin." Gasps echoed softly around them. The words landed like blows. Angela's lips parted in disbelief. "The rear cabin? We have first-class tickets. You've seen them 3 times. Victoria's chin lifted. "Be that as it may, questions remain. It's standard procedure to resolve such matters away from premium passengers." "Premium passengers?" Naomi's voice cracked like thunder in the silence. She shot up straight in her seat, eyes blazing. "We're passengers too. We pay just like everyone else." Victoria's eyes snapped to the child. "Young lady, lower your tone." But Naomi didn't lower it. Her small voice grew stronger, trembling with rage. "You're only saying this because of us. Because of our skin. You didn't tell anyone else to move. Only us." The words sliced through the cabin. Undeniable. Raw. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding one another's eyes. Truth had been spoken, but silence still tried to bury it. Angela's heart pounded, fear and pride colliding inside her chest. She reached for Naomi's hand, but the girl pulled away, standing now in the narrow space between her seat and the aisle. Leila stirred at the raised voices, blinking groggily, confusion clouding her soft eyes. "What's happening?" she murmured. Angela whispered quickly, "It's all right, baby. Just stay seated." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Davis, control the child, or I will have no choice but to involve security when we land." Naomi's voice rose again, clear and unyielding. "Go ahead. Tell them the truth, that you tried to kick us out because you don't think we belong here." The cabin erupted into whispers. A man 2 rows ahead glanced back, shaking his head. The woman in pearls frowned down at her tablet, as though hiding. The young couple clutched hands, nervously, unwilling to look up. Edward Monroe finally spoke, his gravelly voice firm and cutting through the chatter. "Enough!" Victoria turned toward him sharply. "Sir, this does not concern you. It concerns every decent person on this plane," Edward replied, his voice steady but commanding. "I've practiced law for 40 years, and I know harassment when I see it. These girls are passengers, and they will remain in their seats. Do you understand me?" Gasps followed, sharper this time. For the first time, someone had broken the cabin's collective silence with authority. Victoria's composure faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Sir, with all due respect," Edward interrupted, leaning forward, "your behavior is out of line. I suggest you remember your obligations to treat all passengers with dignity." Angela's chest swelled with relief at his words, but her relief was tangled with dread because Victoria's eyes had hardened, her pride bruised, her anger sharpened. This wasn't finished. Naomi trembled, standing so straight it looked painful. Her fists clenched at her sides. Her voice cracked, but she forced it out anyway. "We're not moving, ever. Angela pulled her close, whispering fiercely, "You've made your point. Baby, sit down, please. For me." Naomi's chin wavered, her lip trembling. Finally, reluctantly, she slid back into her seat, tears spilling down her cheeks now in hot defiance. Angela kissed the top of her head, her own throat tight. Victoria glanced around the cabin, scanning faces for support. Most looked away, unwilling to engage. The silence of complicity returned, heavy and suffocating. But Edward's gaze burned steady, unflinching, a silent promise that the Carters were not alone. "Very well," Victoria said at last, her voice clipped, brittle with restrained fury. "Remain in your seats, but this incident will be reported." She pivoted sharply and strode down the aisle, her heels punctuating each step. The hush she left behind was deafening. Angela exhaled shakily, pulling both girls into her arms. Leila clung tightly, her tears fresh. Naomi pressed her face against Angela's side, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs she had refused to let Victoria see. Angela whispered to them both, her voice trembling but resolute. "You are safe. You are strong. And you will never be less than anyone else on this plane." The engines roared softly beneath them, carrying them forward through the night. But in Angela's chest, the weight of the moment pressed heavy. The breaking point had been reached, and though the storm had quieted for now, she knew the aftermath was only beginning. And when Daniel Carter arrived at the other end of this flight, Victoria Hayes would learn that the shadow of a father could be far more powerful than any authority she wielded at 30,000 feet. The cabin had quieted again, but the quiet was tense, unnatural. It wasn't the hush of contentment, nor the lull of passengers drifting into sleep. It was brittle silence stretched thin by the clash that had just unfolded, held together only by unease and avoidance. Angela could feel it in the way passengers shifted in their seats, in the way glances flickered quickly away when eyes met. She held Naomi and Leila close, her arms wrapped protectively around them as if to shield them not from turbulence, but from the storm of judgment still thick in the air. And then the other attendants appeared. Two women in Navy uniforms approached from the galley. One was young, perhaps late 20s, with bright eyes that darted nervously between Angela and Victoria, who had just returned to the front section. The other was older, her expression careful, professional, practiced. Victoria's presence was commanding even when she said nothing. She held the clipboard against her chest, her lips pursed into a thin line of authority. But beneath the veneer of control, her clenched jaw betrayed irritation. The confrontation with Edward Monroe had rattled her, and the quiet rebellion in Naomi's voice lingered in the air like smoke. The younger attendant, her name tag reading Claire Bennett, leaned slightly toward Victoria. "Do we really need to escalate this further?" she asked softly. Her voice meant only for the purser, but audible to Angela, who sat so close. "The children aren't causing trouble. Maybe we should just let it be." Victoria's eyes flashed, sharp as steel. "Procedure must be followed," she said curtly. "We can't have passengers questioning boarding legitimacy. It compromises order." "Compromises order," Edward Monroe muttered from his seat, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap. His tone carried deliberate, "or compromises your pride." A ripple went through the cabin at his words. Several passengers shifted again, glancing at Victoria, then away. Claire's face flushed, but her eyes softened as she glanced toward Angela and the twins. "They're just children," she whispered again, more insistently this time. "Children." The older attendant, her name tag read Janice Cooper, kept her voice neutral, but there was a warning edge beneath. "Claire, be mindful. This is not our decision." Angela watched all of it silently, her heart thudding in her chest. She saw the fracture forming, the line splitting between duty and conscience. Claire's nervous compassion, Janice's rigid professionalism, Victoria's brittle authority. Naomi, still red-eyed from tears, lifted her chin, watching too. She noticed the younger attendant's glance, the faint kindness there. Her small hand gripped Angela's sleeve tightly. "That one," she whispered, so quiet only Angela could hear. "She cares." Angela's throat tightened. She nodded just slightly, grateful her daughters could still see light through the cracks of cruelty. Victoria, unwilling to appear shaken, turned briskly to Janice. "Ensure the galley is secured. I will handle this matter when appropriate." "Yes, ma'am," Janice replied. Her tone clipped. She turned and moved away without hesitation, her posture upright, her face unreadable. But Claire lingered. She shifted her weight, biting her lip, then stepped just a little closer to Angela's row. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Ma'am, if you need anything at all, please press the call button. I'll come." Angela's eyes widened slightly. The kindness was a whisper of air in a suffocating room. She nodded once, her lips parting to form a quiet, "Thank you." Claire straightened quickly as Victoria's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in the glance she cast toward her subordinate. The younger woman hurried back toward the galley, her steps a little too quick, her shoulders tight. Naomi let out a shaky breath. "She's on our side," she whispered again, as if reassuring herself. Angela brushed her daughter's cheek gently. Sometimes even one voice is enough. But she knew the truth. One voice was fragile against the machinery of authority. Claire's compassion was brave, yes, but bravery could be crushed easily if it stood alone. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe's gaze followed the exchange. His expression softened, the faintest smile of approval touching his lips. He recognized courage when he saw it, even in the tremble of a young attendant's defiance. The passengers around them shifted once more. Some still pretended to ignore what had happened, burying themselves in books or screens. Others looked uneasy, as though conscience tugged at them, but fear held them back. The silence was no longer just avoidance, it was indecision. Victoria, sensing the subtle shift, stood straighter. She moved down the aisle with deliberate precision, her heels striking rhythmically against the carpet. Each step was meant to reclaim dominance, to remind the cabin she was still in control. But the control was slipping. Angela felt it. Naomi sensed it too. Her wide, fiery eyes followed Victoria with defiance that had not dimmed. When Victoria reached the galley, she paused, glancing back. Her gaze swept the cabin like a searchlight, daring anyone to challenge her again. No one spoke, but in their silence, the division had already taken root. Angela closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. She pressed a kiss to the tops of her daughters' heads. The storm wasn't over, but now, for the first time, she felt the faintest tremor of shift. Victoria was no longer unchallenged. A shadow loomed larger now, beyond the cabin, beyond the night sky. The shadow of Daniel Carter. His presence had not yet touched this flight, but already his name had begun to weigh on every unspoken thought. When the plane landed, the storm would no longer be contained within this narrow aisle. Angela held her daughters tighter, whispering softly, almost to herself. The truth always finds its way, even here, even now. Naomi leaned into her, exhausted but still burning with quiet fire. Leila clung to her, finally settling back into fitful sleep. The cabin buzzed faintly with resumed conversation, but the divide lingered. Some leaned toward empathy, stirred by Naomi's brave words. Others leaned toward silence, clinging to their distance. And within the crew itself, the first cracks had formed, small, fragile, but undeniable. It was the beginning of something Angela could not yet name. But she felt it, the shift of power, the tipping of scales, and she knew this flight had only begun to reveal its true turbulence. The hum of the engines was steady, a low vibration that filled the cabin like background music. Yet layered beneath that sound was something subtler, something human. Whispers, the kind that slither through rows, weaving from ear to ear, small threads binding strangers into a shared story, whether they want to be bound or not. Angela Davis felt it. She didn't need to hear every word to know. The way passengers leaned toward each other, the way eyes darted briefly to her row before flicking away, told her all she needed to know. She and the girls had become the center of a quiet storm. The subject of hushed conversations passed like contraband down the narrow aisles of first class. Naomi sensed it too. She sat rigid, chin high, but her small fists clenched in her lap betrayed the tension coiling in her. She caught fragments, those children, the attendant, such a scene, but rarely full sentences. Each half-heard word felt like a stone tossed her way, and though she tried to ignore them, the sting built. Leila, still drowsy, pressed into Angela's side. She hadn't picked up on the whispers, not yet. For that, Angela was grateful. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe lowered his newspaper deliberately, letting it rest untouched on his knee. His eyes scanned the cabin, not in curiosity, but in assessment, the way a judge might read a jury. He saw the unease, the cowardice, the few flickers of sympathy. He knew well how quickly whispers could shape narratives, stories becoming truth before facts ever surfaced. One row ahead, the woman in pearls leaned toward her companion. Her voice was a sharp whisper, each syllable crisp. "I simply don't understand why people insist on creating drama. They should have just complied. It would have spared everyone the discomfort." Her companion murmured agreement, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Edward's jaw tightened. He had heard variations of that sentiment countless times in his courtroom compliance as the cure for injustice, as though silence were dignity, as though acceptance were safety. He wanted to turn, to speak, to dismantle the argument with the precision of a gavel striking wood. But he held back. For now. Further back. A younger passenger with headphones pulled one earbud out and leaned across the aisle to whisper to his seatmate. That flight attendant was out of line. You saw it. Those kids didn't do anything wrong. His voice carried just enough that Angela caught the words. Her chest eased slightly at the sound. Naomi's ears perked up too. For the first time since the confrontation, her lips trembled into something resembling relief. Anyone saw the truth. The whisper spread, row to row, side to side. Some twisted the story. Some defended Victoria Hayes. Some defended Angela and the twins. The plane itself became a small-scale courtroom, verdicts handed down in murmurs, alliances formed in silence. Angela closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. She thought of Daniel, how he moved through boardrooms filled with whispers, how easily he bent narratives with the weight of his presence. She wished ached for that presence now, not for herself, but for the girls, for Naomi, who deserved to see truth stand taller than cruelty, for Leila, who deserved innocence instead of suspicion. Naomi leaned closer, her whisper fierce and small. They're talking about us. Angela stroked her hair. Let them talk. It's not fair. No, it's not, Angela admitted softly. But fairness doesn't always come in the moment. Sometimes it comes after. Naomi frowned, unsatisfied, but she pressed closer into her mother's side. At the front of the cabin, Victoria Hayes stood in the galley, her back rigid as she spoke quietly with Janice Cooper. Though too far to hear, her gestures were clipped, sharp, the kind of movements born from wounded pride. She kept glancing back toward Angela's row, her eyes narrowing each time. She knew the whispers were spreading. She could feel her authority slipping, thread by thread. Claire Bennett passed quietly through the aisle, checking latches, her hands shaking just slightly. She offered a quick glance toward Angela, fleeting, cautious, but filled with warmth. Angela caught it and gave the smallest nod. It was enough. A man 3 rows back leaned toward his neighbor, his voice carrying farther than intended. You know who their father is, Daniel Carter, tech magnate, billionaire. If that's really his family, that attendant's career is finished. The neighbor's brows shot up. Seriously, seriously, the man said, nodding. I've read about him. He doesn't play games when it comes to his family. The rumor sparked like a match. The name Daniel Carter began moving from row to row, woven into the whisper network. It changed the tone. Where once the twins were viewed as an inconvenience, now they became a mystery, a possible story worth following. Sympathy deepened for some, calculation for others, but either way, the current shifted. Naomi noticed it too. She tilted her head up toward Angela. They're saying Daddy's name. Angela hesitated. Don't listen to everything they say. But they know, Naomi insisted. They know who he is. Angela brushed her cheek gently. That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you know who you are. Naomi fell quiet, but her eyes glimmered with something complicated relief, pride, and the faintest edge of defiance. Edward Monroe sat back in his seat, listening carefully. He smiled faintly, not because of the rumor itself, but because truth had begun to slip into the narrative. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to tilt the balance. The cabin, once fractured only in silence, was now buzzing with quiet energy. The whisper network had taken hold. Lines were being drawn, not in loud declarations, but in murmured words, exchanged glances, shifting postures. Victoria Hayes felt it too. She turned once more, her eyes sweeping the cabin, and this time, when her gaze met Edward Monroe's, she saw not just one man, but the subtle weight of opinion tilting against her. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening on the clipboard. Angela leaned back, her arms around both girls, her breath steady. The tide was turning, not because she had fought, not because she had shouted, but because truth had begun to ripple through the whispers. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty when Daniel Carter stepped into this story. Whispers would no longer be enough. The truth would roar. The hush of whispers had reached its limit. Like water pressing against a dam, it could no longer be contained. The murmur of voices had shifted into something stronger, clear words spoken without the safety of secrecy. Angela Davis felt it the moment it happened. A man 2 rows back raised his voice just enough to cut through the hum of the engines. "This isn't right," he said firmly, looking straight ahead rather than down at his phone. His words were simple, but they carried. People turned their heads. For once, no one shushed him. Angela's breath caught. She turned slightly, catching a glimpse of him, middle-aged, with glasses perched low on his nose. His face was calm, but resolved. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe allowed himself the faintest nod of acknowledgement. He had been waiting for this, the first crack in the wall of silence. The woman in pearls hissed quietly to her companion, "Why can't people just mind their business?" But her companion didn't answer this time. His gaze lingered on Angela and the twins, his jaw set in quiet disapproval, not at them, but at the situation. Naomi's eyes widened. "He's standing up for us," she whispered fiercely to Angela. Her small fingers tightened around her mother's arm, hope flickering through her exhaustion. Angela gave her daughter's hand a squeeze. Yes, he is. The shift spread quickly. The young man with headphones who had spoken in whispers earlier now removed them entirely. He leaned forward, his voice louder, more insistent. I saw everything. Those kids did nothing wrong. The only person making trouble is your head attendant. Heads turned, necks craned. The dam had broken. Victoria Hayes emerged again from the galley, her expression brittle, her clipboard clutched tightly. She stopped in the aisle, her gaze sweeping over the cabin like a searchlight. Ladies and gentlemen, I must remind you all order is expected during this flight. Disruptions will not be tolerated. Her words, sharp and commanding, were meant to reassert dominance. But this time, they rang hollow. Edward Monroe folded his newspaper with deliberate care and spoke, his voice strong, carrying easily. The disruption has not come from these children, Ms. Hayes. It has come from your conduct, and I suspect I am not the only one who sees it. A murmur of agreement swept the cabin. Heads nodded. A few passengers clapped softly, hesitant but real. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Sir, you are overstepping. Edward interrupted. I have spent decades in courtrooms. I know harassment when I see it, and I will testify to it if need be. Angela's heart pounded. She wanted to weep at his courage, at the way his words wrapped around her daughters like a shield. Naomi's eyes shimmered with something fierce, a fragile smile breaking through. Leila, awake now, looked confused but comforted, leaning into her sister as though sensing that a tide was shifting. Claire Bennett appeared again at the far end of the aisle, hesitation written all over her face. She glanced between Angela and Victoria, then back to the passengers. Finally, she took a breath and stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I was here, she said. I saw how they were treated. Mrs. Davis showed the tickets more than once. The children did nothing wrong. Gasps rippled. A flight attendant had spoken out. Not just a passenger, a crew member. Victoria turned on her sharply. Claire, return to your duties. Now. But Claire's voice grew stronger. I can't pretend this didn't happen. It was wrong. Silence followed. Heavy, tense silence. Then someone clapped louder this time. Another joined. Within moments, the sound spread, small but undeniable. Angela pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes burning with tears she tried to hold back. Her daughters watched in awe, the sound of strangers' hands meeting in defense of their dignity, filling the air like a bomb. Victoria's face flushed crimson. Her authority, once absolute, was slipping away. She straightened her shoulders, speaking sharply. Enough, you are all jeopardizing the order and safety of this flight. This conversation ends here. No, said Edward Monroe firmly, this conversation begins here, and it will continue after we land in the proper forums. The words landed with the weight of judgment, a verdict spoken in advance. Angela looked around and saw it clearly now. The shift. Where once there had been silence, there was solidarity. Not universal, some still sat stiff, unwilling to engage, but enough to stand, enough to change the air. Naomi leaned close, her voice a tremor. They're on our side now. Mama. Angela kissed her forehead, whispering, yes, baby. You were brave first, and now they're brave too. Victoria's eyes darted to the front of the cabin, to Janice Cooper, who stood frozen, her professionalism cracking into unease. For the first time, the purser looked uncertain. The authority she had wielded so tightly was unraveling thread by thread. The plane soared on through the night sky, but within its cabin the ground had shifted, whispers had become voices, silence had been broken, and beneath it all a shadow loomed ever larger, the shadow of Daniel Carter. The whispers of his name had already begun circulating. When he arrived, there would be no need for murmurs, no need for clapping hands to prove a point. His presence would speak for itself. Angela sat taller, her arms around her daughters, her breath steadier now. For the first time since the ordeal began, hope felt less like a fragile flame and more like a gathering fire. The breaking silence had given birth to something powerful, and there was no turning back. The whispers had broken into open voices, but now those voices carried something heavier, a name. It rolled through the cabin like thunderclouds building before a storm. Daniel Carter. Angela Davis didn't need to ask who had first spoken it. The rumor had caught fire somewhere mid-cabin and now spread seat by seat, faster than the plane itself cut through the night sky. She saw the way passengers' expressions shifted as the name reached them: surprise, awe, calculation, even fear. Leila clung tighter to her arm. "Mama, everyone keeps saying Daddy's name." Angela smoothed her daughter's hair, her voice steady though her heart beat like a drum. "Yes, baby, they know who he is." Naomi straightened in her seat, her pride finally visible after hours of being pressed down. "Now they know they can't treat us this way." Angela's eyes softened at her daughter's fire. She wanted to nurture that strength, yet she feared it too, the way injustice had already carved steel into a child's heart. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe leaned back, watching the shift. He saw the passengers scrolling on their phones despite airplane mode warnings, searching for Daniel Carter, connecting headlines with faces. He saw them piecing together the story of billionaires' children harassed in first class, a purser out of control, a scandal brewing before the wheels even touched the runway. The cabin no longer felt contained. It felt like a stage. And beyond it, an unseen audience was waiting: journalists, executives, the public eye. Edward could almost hear the gavel striking. This case was already on record. Victoria Hayes sensed it too. She stood rigid at the galley, her clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted seat to seat, reading expressions, hearing fragments of conversation. Her authority had always been about control of the small, contained environment of the cabin, but now that environment was slipping into something larger beyond her reach. She stepped forward sharply. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her tone brisk, "I must remind you all that speculation and gossip have no place on this flight. You are here as passengers, and I am here to maintain order and safety. That is my responsibility, and I will not be undermined by rumors." Her words fell flat. Passengers exchanged glances, some skeptical, some openly hostile. The authority she clung to was brittle glass, cracking under pressure. Claire Bennett, standing a few rows back, couldn't contain herself. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. "It isn't gossip if it's true. Everyone here saw how they were treated, and everyone knows Mr. Carter doesn't ignore things like this." The cabin rippled with agreement. Phones lit up again, screens glowing in the dim light. Search results confirmed the truth. Daniel Carter, CEO of Orion Technologies, billionaire, known for his calm but relentless pursuit of justice, especially when his family was involved. Angela caught fragments. "He'll sue the airline. This will be everywhere by morning. That attendant's finished." She closed her eyes briefly, a swirl of emotions overtaking her. Relief that the truth was surfacing, fear for her daughters, caught in the spotlight of whispers, and a deep, gnawing ache that their pain had become spectacle. Naomi, however, sat taller. For the first time, she let a small smile bloom. "They're scared now." Angela leaned down, whispering in her ear, "It's not about making them scared, sweetheart. It's about making them understand." Naomi frowned, processing the words. She didn't fully grasp the difference yet, but Angela hoped one day she would. Edward Monroe finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "Ms. Hayes," he said, addressing Victoria directly. "Do you understand what you've set into motion here? This is no longer about procedure. It's about principle, and principle has consequences." Victoria's jaw clenched. She turned sharply toward him. "My job is to ensure order. If passengers undermine me," Edward cut in, his voice slicing through. "Order without justice is not order. It is tyranny. And you, ma'am, have crossed that line." The words landed heavy. A few passengers clapped again, louder this time, the sound filling the cabin like waves against rock. Victoria flushed deep crimson, her breathing sharp, almost ragged. She turned on her heel, retreating to the galley as though distance could shield her from the truth now echoing through the rows. Angela watched, her arms tight around her daughters. She could feel the tension winding tighter, not looser. The closer they came to landing, the closer the storm came to breaking. A woman in business attire leaned across the aisle to Angela, her voice soft but clear. "When this plane lands, you won't be alone. People saw, people heard. There are witnesses." Angela's throat tightened. She nodded, gratitude swelling though words failed her. Naomi's eyes glowed with pride. "See, Mama people know the truth now." Angela stroked her cheek, whispering, "Yes, my love, they do." But inside, her thoughts spiraled. What would Daniel do when he learned she knew his calm, his patience, his deep reservoir of restraint, but she also knew his fury cold, deliberate, unstoppable when injustice touched his family? The world often mistook his composure for weakness. They learned quickly it was the opposite. The plane hummed on through the night. Outside the windows, the darkness was vast, endless. But inside, anticipation grew with every mile. Edward Monroe leaned slightly forward, addressing Angela directly for the first time. "Mrs. Davis," he said kindly, "you have handled yourself with remarkable grace. I know what it is to fight battles in silence. You should know silence is breaking here. People are ready to stand." Angela swallowed hard, her eyes misting. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi clutched her hand fiercely. "Mama doesn't stay silent. She's strong." Edward smiled warmly at the child. "And so are you, young lady. Bravery takes many forms. You've shown yours tonight." Naomi beamed, her pride no longer hidden. Leila looked up sleepily, murmuring, "I just want to go home." Angela kissed her forehead gently. "We will, baby. We will." The shadow of Daniel Carter loomed larger still. Passengers spoke his name now with certainty, not rumor. Victoria avoided their eyes. Claire's compassion shone brighter. Edward's calm judgment grew heavier. And Angela, though weary, sat taller, her daughters anchored against her. The plane had not yet touched ground, but already the reckoning had begun. The seatbelt sign chimed, a soft ding that usually meant little more than routine, but tonight it sounded like the tolling of a bell. The cabin lights dimmed, shadows stretching long across tired faces. The plane was descending, slicing through clouds toward the city lights below. Yet inside, no one rested. The air was thick, humming with a tension that pressed down heavier than the atmosphere outside. Angela Davis held her daughters close, one on each side. Naomi sat upright, her eyes bright and sharp, while Leila tucked into her mother's side, half asleep, half clinging to comfort. Angela's hand stroked Leila's hair absently as her eyes stayed fixed ahead. She could feel it, the storm building, the reckoning drawing closer with every mile. Daniel would be waiting. And once his presence filled this story, there would be no mistaking the outcome. Across the aisle, Edward Monroe leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked calm, but his eyes gleamed with anticipation, like a judge preparing for the final arguments before a verdict. He glanced at Angela, offered her the smallest nod, as though to say, "You've done enough. The rest is coming." Further up, Victoria Hayes stood stiff in the galley, her posture a fortress, her clipboard clutched tight. She tried to project control, but her eyes betrayed the cracks. Every whisper of Daniel Carter's name had chipped away at her authority, and now the dissent only meant one thing: she would have to face him. Janice Cooper hovered nearby, lips pressed into a thin line. She had always followed Victoria's lead, but the night had worn her down. Her silence no longer felt like loyalty. It felt like fear. Claire Bennett, standing just behind, took a deep breath. She knew what was coming, too. She had seen the way passengers looked at Angela and the twins, now not as disruptions, but as people wronged, and she had chosen her side. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into New York. Please return to your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare for landing." Routine words, but to Angela, they sounded like a countdown. Naomi leaned toward her. "Mama, will Daddy be waiting?" Angela kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, he'll be there." Naomi smiled faintly, fierce pride flickering again. Leila stirred, murmuring sleepily, "I want Daddy." Angela's heart tightened. Soon, she thought, soon. The descent felt endless. The plane tilted slightly, engines shifting pitch, city lights flickering faintly below. The passengers sat in uneasy silence now, broken only by the occasional cough, the shuffle of seatbelts, the rustle of clothes. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore, it was anticipation. And then the landing, a jolt, the screech of tires against the runway, the roar of reverse thrusters. The plane slowed, the city drawing nearer, brighter. The moment the wheels touched ground, the tension snapped taut. People straightened in their seats, eyes darting to Angela, to Victoria, to the aisle. They knew. Something waited beyond that door. The intercom clicked again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." But no one was thinking of safety announcements. All eyes were on the front. Angela's chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths. She had carried herself through humiliation, through whispers, through the breaking of silence. Now, she prepared for the moment her husband's presence would fill the air. Naomi held her hand tightly, almost trembling with anticipation. Leila sat up fully now, rubbing her eyes, sensing something monumental about to unfold. The plane slowed, taxied, and finally came to a halt. The seatbelt sign dinged again, freedom, the permission to rise, but no one moved. They waited, and then the door opened. Daniel Carter stepped inside. He didn't rush, didn't storm. He simply entered, tall, composed, dressed in a simple charcoal suit. His presence was a force more powerful than raised voices. The air itself seemed to shift. The whispers died instantly. Passengers who had been bold in their murmurs fell silent, eyes fixed on him. Angela exhaled, relief and strength flooding her at once. Naomi gasped, her whole body lighting up. "Daddy!" Leila cried softly. Daddy Daniel's eyes found them instantly. He moved down the aisle with measured steps, each one deliberate, unhurried, yet unstoppable. He crouched as he reached them, his arms sweeping his daughters in. Naomi clutched his neck fiercely. Leila buried her face in his shoulder, and for a moment, time itself softened. Then his gaze lifted to Angela. Their eyes met, and without words, everything was exchanged. The pain endured, the injustice suffered, the storm yet to break. He stood slowly, turning. His eyes settled on Victoria Hayes. The purser froze. The clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp, her knuckles white. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked small. Daniel spoke, his voice calm, low, yet resonant enough to reach every ear. I am Daniel Carter. These are my children, and tonight they were humiliated. The words landed heavy, undeniable. Murmurs rippled, but no one dared interrupt. Victoria tried to speak, her voice cracking. Mr. Carter, He raised a hand slightly, silencing her without force. Only presence. His calm was more cutting than rage. I don't raise my voice for spectacle, he said evenly, but I do not tolerate cruelty. My daughters were treated as less. My family was degraded. That is not acceptable. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Passengers held their breath, watching, waiting. Edward Monroe's lips curved faintly in satisfaction. Justice had entered the room. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on Victoria. Do you understand what you've done? Her lips trembled. I was following protocol, no. His voice was sharp now, just once, like steel. You were following prejudice, and you have no place in the skies if this is how you wield authority. Claire Bennett stepped forward, her voice steady at last. Mr. Carter, sir, I witnessed everything. Mrs. Davis and the children were respectful, compliant. Ms. Hayes escalated without cause. Daniel turned his gaze briefly to her, nodding once. Thank you for speaking truth. Victoria's face crumpled, pride collapsing into desperation. Please, Mr. Carter. But Daniel had already turned back to his family, his arm around Angela, his daughters pressed close. This isn't about me. It's about them. No child should be made to feel small because of who they are, and no family should endure what mine has tonight. The cabin erupted applause, not hesitant this time, but thunderous, unrestrained. Passengers clapped, cheered softly. Some even stood. Victoria stood frozen, her authority shattered, her career dangling by a thread. Daniel held his family close, his eyes steady, his voice calm even as the storm of reaction filled the cabin. This ends tonight. But the fight for dignity will not. The applause swelled again. Angela's eyes burned with tears she did not hide. Naomi beamed with pride. Leila sighed into her father's shoulder. Safe at last. And as the cabin door opened wider, the outside world waiting beyond, Daniel Carter stood as both father and force, the shadow that had loomed now fully present. The reckoning had arrived. The applause still echoed when the plane door opened wider. Beyond it, the jet bridge stretched like a passage into another world. Passengers gathered their belongings slowly, many lingering, as if reluctant to step away from the charged moment they had witnessed. Angela Davis rose carefully, one arm holding Leila close, the other hand clasping Naomi's. Daniel stood beside them, tall, composed, his presence radiating calm power. The storm inside the cabin had broken, but outside, a different storm waited. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the first flashes met them. Reporters had been tipped off mid-flight, their phones already buzzing with fragments of the story. Cameras rose like weapons, microphones thrust forward. Mr. Carter, is it true your children were harassed by the crew? Mrs. Davis, how did the airline treat you during the incident? Naomi. "Leila, are you okay?" Angela shielded the twins instinctively, guiding them close to her side. Daniel raised a hand. "Steady," commanding silence without force. "My children are not your spectacle," he said firmly. The reporters hesitated, lowering their voices, but not their cameras. Outside the terminal, airline officials waited in stiff suits, their smiles thin, their eyes sharp with calculation. The CEO of the airline himself had come, summoned by urgency. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Carter, I want to personally apologize for Daniel didn't take the hand." His voice was calm, unflinching. "An apology does not erase humiliation. My daughters were treated as lesser, my family demeaned. I want accountability, not empty words." The CEO faltered, glancing at the watching cameras, then back at Daniel. "We will investigate thoroughly. Ms. Hayes will be suspended immediately pending review. I assure you, we take this seriously." Victoria Hayes stood a few steps behind, pale, trembling, her clipboard gone. She looked smaller now, her pride shattered, but Daniel didn't even glance her way. She was no longer the center of power. She was already undone by her own actions. Angela felt Naomi's hand tighten in hers. "Mama, everyone is watching." "Yes, baby," Angela whispered, "and they need to." Edward Monroe, walking just behind them, stepped forward with deliberate weight. "I will provide my statement," he said firmly to the officials. "As a retired judge, I will testify to what I witnessed. It was not a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, plain and simple." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A witness of his stature meant the story could not be spun away. The truth was too strong now. Claire Bennett stepped forward next, her uniform slightly wrinkled, her voice shaking but clear. "I was there as well. I saw how Mrs. Davis and the girls were treated. They were respectful. The mistreatment came from within our crew." Reporters' pens scratched faster, cameras clicked furiously. The narrative was no longer rumor, it was fact, spoken by those who had lived it. Daniel pulled Angela and the girls closer, his arms steady around them. His eyes swept the room, not with anger, but with the steady weight of responsibility. "This isn't about me," he said slowly. "It isn't even just about my family. It is about the thousands of families who endure prejudice quietly, without cameras, without witnesses willing to speak. Tonight, it happened in first class, but it happens every day, in ways unseen. That must end." The words struck like thunder. Reporters stilled. Passengers nearby nodded, some even wiped at their eyes. Angela felt tears welling as she looked at him, at the strength with which he carried not only their pain, but the pain of so many others. She squeezed his hand, her voice soft but steady. "We'll face it together." Naomi stood tall, her chin lifted, echoing the fire of her father's words. "We're not small," she said loudly, catching a few startled looks. "We're not less." Leila, quieter, pressed into her father's chest, but her whisper carried in the hush. "I just want people to be kind." Daniel kissed the top of her head gently. "That's all any of us should want. Sweetheart." The officials shifted uncomfortably, but the cameras had captured too much already. The CEO forced a tight smile. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Davis, please know we will address this swiftly. We will make sure such incidents never happen again." Daniel's gaze was sharp. "Words are easy, change is not. But I will be watching, and so will the world." With that, he guided his family past the flashes, past the whispers, into the waiting night beyond the terminal. The officials trailed behind, powerless now to control the story that had already taken flight far beyond them. Outside, The cool air hit Angela's face, refreshing after the stifling press of the cabin and terminal. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift, though not fully. The scars of the evening would remain, etched into memory. Edward approached once more before parting ways. "You should know, Mrs. Davis, you showed remarkable strength tonight. Your daughters will remember not just what was done to them, but how you stood for them." Angela smiled through her tears. "Thank you, and thank you for standing with us." He tipped his hat gently, then disappeared into the crowd. Claire lingered too, nervously twisting her hands. I don't know what will happen to me now, but I couldn't stay silent. I hope it helped." Angela stepped forward, touching her arm softly. "It did. More than you know," Daniel added, his voice warm but firm. "Truth always helps. You did the right thing. Claire, that is what matters." The young attendant's eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly, then hurried off, her shoulders lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. As the Carter family stepped into their waiting car, Angela finally allowed herself to exhale. Naomi leaned against her, still awake, still proud. Leila drifted to sleep at last, her head on her mother's lap, safe in the comfort of family. Daniel sat beside them, his arms stretched around all three, his eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond. "This is not the end," he murmured. Angela turned to him. "I know. It won't be quiet," he said softly. "There will be backlash, headlines, noise, but the truth will carry, and maybe, just maybe, it will shift something." Angela pressed her hand over his. "We don't need the whole world to change overnight. Just enough. Enough for them to grow up freer than we did." Naomi stirred, murmuring half asleep. "We'll make them see." Daniel kissed her hair gently. "Yes, my brave girl. You will." The city lights shimmered ahead, a mosaic of possibility and pain, progress and struggle. The road stretched forward, uncertain but unbroken, and in the quiet of the car, surrounded by the hum of tires and the rhythm of breath, the Carter family held each other close. The night had been long, cruel, unrelenting, but from its shadows, a light had emerged not just for them, but for everyone who still waited to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity. The reckoning had begun, and it would not end here. As the plane touched down, the story did not end. It began. A mother's quiet strength. Two daughters who refused to shrink. Passengers who chose to speak truth instead of silence. And a father who reminded the world that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. But what lingers most is not the confrontation. It is the question it leaves with us. How many times has this happened when no cameras were there? How many children have been made to feel small, unseen, unworthy? Discrimination is not always loud. Sometimes it hides behind rules, uniforms, and polite words. But tonight, we saw it unmasked, and we saw it defeated not with rage, but with courage, with truth, and with the unshakable demand for respect. Let this story sit with you. Let it stir something deep, because the fight is not over. It is carried forward by every voice that refuses silence, by every parent who shields their child, by every witness who speaks, and by you, each listener, each viewer who chooses to care. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of the power of justice, then share it. Let others feel it too. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next story that will challenge, inspire, and remind us all of who we are meant to be.